Well, it sounds like a version of Ottawa. The Calgary Police Commission is supposed to be an independent body, and yet City Hall is supposedly having meetings with it every Tuesday. Plus the fact we have two councillors on that commission who voted to one of them voted to defund, that was Giancarlo. And the other one, Walcourt, he's an active member of BLM, and both of them want to defund the police. So we definitely have some conflict of interest here, and all of a sudden they seem to be able to dictate what the police are allowed to do. So they're actually getting them to do illegal things as well.
When you honk your horn a whole ton of times, that's what caused all the trouble about the court injunction. I have no choice but to enforce that. Okay?
Well, we're allowed to honk at the Ukrainian protest.
There's no court injunction in place there, is there?
Oh, so it's politically motivated.
Whatever you need to hear.
That's just what I think. Seems, doesn't it? Seems a little politically motivated, doesn't it? Yeah. Politically motivated tickets.
You have to leave now, otherwise I got to tow your car.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News, and we are on location here at City Hall where protesters continue to gather despite the third week of a police injunction effectively seeking to undermine their rights to protest. They have been limited access to parks, limited access to amplification technology, and limited in their capacity to march through the streets. But they do have permission to be here at City Hall protesting and gathering, and they will continue to do so. It is very sad to see the politicization of enforcement. Mayor Jyoti Gondek and City Council seeking this injunction, going after these people for expressing their fundamental freedoms. For 2 years, we saw virtually no incidents. They were completely peaceful. A couple weeks ago, the first week after the injunction came into place, we saw violence, we saw arrests, we saw conflict. Last week, a little more quiet. It remains to be seen if today will be peaceful or if there will be lockdowns, clampdowns by enforcement, escalation, and Antifa-style counter-protests. But we will be here once again all day to cover the story.
I had a little stop-in this morning at Pastor Art's church. Is anyone there today? If you get a chance, go on YouTube. You can hear a bit about his story and his experience in the last 50 days he spent in prison. Something that really stuck out for me, he talked about the impact of the daily protests out at the remand center. Every day, for over 40 days, his family and his friends and supporters were out at the remand center to support him.
Hey guys, I just wanted to mention, we have had probably 100 people come up to us today and thank us for our in-depth and exclusive long interview with Pastor Artur Pawlowski, fresh off his release. His story means so much to so many people here. And in case you haven't seen that video, we wanted to make sure you don't miss out. So we're going to include the link to that hour-long exclusive interview, fresh off Pastor Artur Pawlowski's release from jail, in the description below.
Chocolate for the hard workers.
And I'm all right, thanks, so appreciate it. Sure. So Jesse, I wanted to ask you, we've seen over these last 3 weeks with the injunction, we're basically seeing the police being used as a private security firm for ideological politicians seeking to allow protests that are in line with their values and to ban protests, or at least limit protests that are not. What do you make of the police being used and politicized in this way?
It's a tragedy, and the people here will continue to fight, and we will fight for our right.
Well, that's been obvious for quite a while. You see how they dealt with the protesters in Ottawa compared to how they've dealt with organizations ranging from Black Lives Matter to all sorts of various political issues. Frankly, if it helps blackface Trudeau cover up his reputation, he'll support it. But if you're protesting for freedom in what was once a free country, you end up getting, well, police presence everywhere. If you're in Ottawa, you can get beat, snipers on the rooftops. It's not the country I grew up in.
Well, one of the questions we're asking folks today is we've seen with this injunction in place for the last 3 weeks, these peaceful protests after 2 years without incident, the police are suddenly being wielded like a political tool for ideological politicians. What do you think of that?
Well, it sounds like a version of Ottawa. The Calgary Police Commission is supposed to be an independent body, and yet City Hall is supposedly having meetings with it every Tuesday. Plus the fact we have two councillors on that commission who voted to one of them voted to defund. That was Giancarlo. And the other one, Walcourt, he's an active member of BLM, and both of them want to defund the police. So we definitely have some conflict of interest here, and all of a sudden they seem to be able to dictate what the police are allowed to do. So they're actually getting them to do illegal things as well.
Of course, all around the world, anything that anyone disagrees with that's being forced onto them or into their life that they don't agree with, they should have the right to stand up and say no, even if they are a minority or a majority in a situation. No one should have the right to just bend over and have to continue living their life that way because the government says so, right?
So we've seen over the past 3 weeks with the City of Calgary injunction in place, the police effectively being wielded as an ideological tool for the Mayor of Calgary. We saw similar things in Ottawa. What do you make of the police, instead of upholding the law, enforcing ideologies, limiting people's capacity to protest?
The police are going to do what they're told. That's generally what they do. We've seen some exceptions, like Officer Ryan Dennison. But in general, look at the freedom movement's attempts to get to the leadership of this. We're talking about MLAs, MPs, Yodi Gondek. So we try to do that, and what happens is we have to deal with the police, because the police are an extension of our crooked politicians' will and desire. I mean, when they stand in the middle of 17th Avenue with Antifa, with so-called counter-protesters, they're there because City Council tells them to be there. Now, there's going to be some dynamics amongst police. If a counter-protester pushes a police officer, he's going to push back. That's off script. But the problem is they're going to do what they're told to do. There's historical precedent for that. We must continue to do what we do. They have a job to do in their minds, whether it's because they're keeping their salary and their pensions, or they're duped, or they just don't want to look any further than the order handed down to them by their staff sergeant. They're going to do what they're going to do. The resistance, we're going to do what we're going to do. We will overcome. And let me make something perfectly clear. When we get a fake John Doe injunction telling us that we can't march in the Avenue or we can't assemble at Central Memorial Park, that's a minefield. We will maneuver around it. We're not here to obey these mandates, these corrupt laws, and these fake injunctions. We're here to do the right thing.
The two officers seen here sporting the thin blue line were later captured on video arresting Pastor Derek Reimer. Pastor Derek Reimer was one of our Fight the Fines recipients. He, like Pastor Artur Pawlowski, garnered the ire of authorities for daring to feed the homeless throughout COVID-19. He was arrested under the justification of this injunction, which bans use of amplification in protests and parks. He was not protesting or attending the protest in any way, shape, or form, but regardless, the injunction was utilized in targeted fashion to silence him as a pastor.
To Jesus Christ, that's good news. You're passing the time. Okay, Brad, shame on you. It's called freedom of speech. Yeah. This injunction. You guys know Section 136.
What do you make of the police being used effectively as a political arm of enforcement for ideologues like Mayor Yodi Gondek, Police Chief Mark Neufeld, Justin Trudeau? It goes all the way up. They're being used, though, effectively as a private security force. What do you make of that?
First of all, I'm a very big supporter of the police. They keep our community safe, and I just pray that God will just watch over them, keep them safe. I think it's really bad that they're being used, and I really feel sorry for them, because I think a lot of them, if you ask them outside out when they're not in uniform or whatever, they would actually say that they support the protest, but they have families to support and things like the bills to pay, things like that, and so they have to do it. So I think the injunctions are just really wrong. I've been attending, not since the beginning, but for quite some time, and there has never been any incidents, and in fact the incidents that the media showed were not the protesters, but were the counter-protesters, the ones when they were down by the park, and yet the protesters got blamed for it. I've never seen an incident involving a protester. It's always been peaceful, people hugging, kids, families. So, I think it's really bad that the police are being dragged into it, but I really understand it, that they have a job to do and they're trying to do it.
So you were just pulled over. Can you tell us what happened?
Well, I honked, and they pulled me over.
Yeah. Shocking. Did you ever think you'd see a day where in Canada simply honking in support of something?
I don't give a
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the swearing, but I do not care.
Yeah.
So, I still honked.
Yeah.
My friend got a ticket for it. I still honked. I don't care.
You don't care. You've had enough. You think this is ridiculous. What do you make of police targeting?
Straight from Ottawa.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm from Quebec. We came straight from Ottawa.
From the protests in Ottawa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just like grouped and we came out west. So. I keep thinking this is like the officer.
Your flag.
I'm like, is he here? Yeah.
What do you make of this? Just people being targeted. They've got 30 police waiting on the side of the road to catch someone honking. There's serious crime, criminality, all sorts of madness going on in the city. And they've got this massive police force here dealing with this.
What do I think about it?
Yeah.
I don't care. It's not going to stop us.
You know, your horn, not allowed. So I could go one of two ways. We could charge you with breaching a court order. That's serious. Or I can give you an $81 ticket for honking your horn when you're not supposed to. I don't have a problem with you waving your flag, giving them a thumbs up, smiling, whatever you want to do. But when you honk your horn a whole ton of times, that's what caused all the trouble about the court injunction. I have no choice but to enforce that. Okay?
Well, we're allowed to honk at the Ukrainian protest.
There's no court injunction in place there, is there?
Oh, so it's politically motivated.
Whatever you need to hear.
That's just what I think. Seems, doesn't it? Seems a little politically motivated, doesn't it? Yeah. Politically motivated tickets.
You have to leave now, otherwise I gotta tow your car. Right up.
So we've actually seen our first incident of enforcement against somebody for driving by and honking. They're right here. They've just been issued an $81 ticket. The police actually threatened her with enforcing a court injunction and serious contempt of court charges, but they said they were graciously letting her off with only an $81 ticket for daring to honk her horn. One person, an observer who witnessed the incident, suggested that police are not enforcing honking at Ukrainian rallies or many of the other protests that are taking place. The police officer very wrongly said, well, the injunction isn't in place for that. It is in fact an injunction against protests broadly speaking. The fact that very clearly this police officer just admitted that they're only going to be enforcing this law against certain groups is extremely troubling and further proof of the politicization of enforcement by Calgary Police Services. So just a bit of an update, we actually have seen some more people pulled over at one of the adjacent pedestrian roadways just behind me. There's effectively a line of police ready to go, and if people are seen honking, they go after them in pursuit. One person, they pulled him quite a bit of way down, so we weren't able to speak with them. We did speak to the other individual who was pulled over. We're going to remain here on the scene to capture any more of this enforcement. It seems like they're simply issuing $81 tickets, not filing contempt of court or injunction charges, but it remains to be seen. We're going to reach out to as many of these people as we can to get their stories and to help them as they fight against this selective enforcement.
What a shame! Shame on you! You guys are ending on the wrong side of history here, man! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame! Back it up! Please, back it up! Back it up! Shame! 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 Shame on you!
Well, the protest is, as we mentioned, wrapping up here. People have sort of spread out in multiple directions. There isn't an official coordinated march portion, but an impromptu group has sort of gathered and in compliance with all the rules and the injunctions is walking down this pedestrian street, this pedestrian roadway, standing in solidarity, standing for freedoms, and continuing in line with the injunction to protest for their freedoms. If you agree with the hundreds of people here at City Hall protesting vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions that Canada has become fundamentally un-Canadian throughout COVID-19, you can help us fight back and take a stand by making a contribution, a tax receipt eligible contribution to the Democracy Fund to fight vaccine mandates at fightvaccinepassports.com.